Welcome to Straight Talk with My OBMD podcast. Join me for a bi-weekly discussion on topics most relevant to women's health today. We are your source for medically accurate, real-world advice in all things related to your health and well-being as a woman. From menses to menopause, we've got you covered. I'm your host, Dr. Dana Smith, a fully practicing, board-certified OBGYN physician with close to 20 years experience. I am also the founder of the website that is 100% dedicated to women's health, myobmd.org. At myobmd.org, we write on all aspects related to women's health. Listen to our podcast, visit our website, subscribe to our newsletter, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, myobmd.org. Welcome to another episode of Straight Talk with My OBMD. I'm your host, Dr. Dana Smith, proud founder of myobmd.org, where everything is about you and your health. Today, I have the esteemed pleasure of talking to Dr. Ali Chappell. Dr. Chappell is a registered dietitian. She also has a master's degree and a PhD in nutrition and reproductive endocrinology. She is the founder of Lily Health and lilyhealth.com. I believe, did I get that correct?
Correct.
And she is also the author of the Low Insulin Lifestyle book. So, full transparency, Dr. Chappell and I just completed another podcast. We spoke about the low insulin lifestyle and what is it and the importance of insulin testing. But we felt it was important to have a space where we discuss the effects of insulin resistance on infertility. So for ladies who are, or couples who are trying to conceive, trying to expand their family, we want to touch on that and offer that exclusive information to you, because we know that that is something that is very personal and that is a space that is that has its unique challenges. And so we wanted to have this special part of insulin resistance as it relates to infertility. Dr. Chappell, welcome to my Straight Talk with My OBMD. It's so great to have you on again. Please, if you could take a minute to let us know about yourself and how you got onto the low insulin lifestyle.
Absolutely. I just shared this, so I'll make it shorter. So in case, if they want to go back and listen. So I have PCOS and I got diagnosed when I was 21 and I'd been having in one period every 8, I don't even know. I never tracked it. So when they'd ask me, I'd say sometime last year, I don't remember. And cysts on my ovaries and acne and 50 pounds heavier, studying to be a dietitian, and never learned about PCOS or insulin resistance. And that really launched me into this education and research journey where I really took the time to become an expert in insulin resistance and how that affects PCOS. And so here we are today. I've written Low Insulin Lifestyle to try to educate other patients about this insulin resistance, but also how they can manage it. And then Lily is an acronym for Low Insulin Lifestyle. So Lily Health is really a digital platform is really based on education and the tools and resources to help put this into a lifestyle plan.
Well, we're so grateful to you, not just for being on our show, really, but for championing the cause of a low insulin lifestyle and the importance of it, and for taking your challenges and to turn it into your mission. And now we know why probably you were assigned, I should say, to kind of have that issue, because you were really the perfect ambassador and you have used that issue to turn it into a solution, not just for yourself, but for so many people. So kudos to you for doing that. And thank you for sharing the information. So let's get right to it. We know, of course, there's an association between PCOS And we know PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. It affects not just your ovary, but a different organ systems. And we know that ladies who are afflicted with PCOS have a challenge in becoming pregnant. Doesn't mean that you cannot become pregnant. It just means that it becomes a little bit more difficult to become pregnant, because ladies with PCOS, their ovulation occurs very sporadically and there's no rhyme or reason. It's just such a random occurrence. It's not a regular, it doesn't occur at a regular interval. And so we know from that aspect that creates a challenge in becoming pregnant, because of course, biology 101, you got to have you have to have an egg. The sperm has to meet an egg, right? They got to meet up. The ovary just keeps not showing up to the party, then nothing's going to happen. So, so we know that aspect. So tell us a little bit about how insulin resistance role in that infertility process.
Well, I mean, insulin resistance is underlying every aspect of getting pregnant and staying pregnant and having a healthy pregnancy. I mean, it's the whole thing. So really kind of going back to just biology 101 of the menstrual cycle, right? Is understanding how insulin is telling, hormones in the brain to secrete LH. And I think I think if you've been trying to have a baby, you probably have an understanding of LH and FSH, and most of them are tracking these things. So when your insulin is too high, it tells this hormone in the brain called gonadotropin releasing hormone. I won't go into too much specifics, but it causes over secretion of LH. Now, LH actually needs to be lower in the beginning of the cycle, because you have to have FSH to stimulate the follicle to grow and get ready to ovulate. So that egg is supposed to be growing and maturing and getting ready to actually ovulate. And then mid-cycle, you have this surge of LH, and that's what really releases the egg. Now, what happens in PCOS is that when your insulin's high, you're over secreting LH from the pituitary in the brain. Well, if your LH is high over the whole cycle, then those follicles aren't getting stimulated the way they need to be, so they're not maturing. But then also, if it's too high, you don't get that mid-cycle surge, which means that egg, even if it's there ready, waiting to get ovulated, it doesn't go anywhere. And so it just stays on the ovary and becomes a cyst. It's just a fluid, a follicle that never ovulated. So I think understanding that, to know that the whole reason why you're not ovulating, there is nothing wrong with your machinery. It is simply that you are not having the right hormonal balance in order to ovulate. And that is all due to having high insulin. So when you lower that insulin, everything starts to work as it should, right? You can really lower that stimulus. And that's what we've seen in our studies. We had these reproductive endocrinologists, these fertility specialists, had so many of the patients in our studies conceive that they actually wrote an independent case series, because many of these patients have been struggling for years to conceive. And they wrote that on average, patients conceived within 86 days of following a low insulin lifestyle, because their priority was lowering insulin, which means they ovulated. If they were ovulating, they were more likely to fertilize. And so that is how lowering insulin helps ovulation.
Wow.
But let's expand that a little further. We know that patients with PCOS have 3 to 5 times higher rate of miscarriage. And that is because of insulin. So one of the reasons is because insulin causes inflammation in your body, and when it's too high, and that inflammation means it's also causing inflammation into the uterine lining, the endometrium, which means it's less likely to actually allow implantation. So even if you were to ovulate and that egg was to be able to be fertilized, it's less likely to implant. And PCOS patients know this better than anyone. How many times do you do IVF and you have failed embryo transfers? Even though they're healthy embryos, they're ready to implant, they fail because insulin resistance prevents, or it can affect the ability to implant. And so with that, you have higher rates of miscarriage too. So
Mhm.
those are two really, really important factors as it relates to
Mhm.
actually getting pregnant.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And, it's interesting because we know that the process of trying to become pregnant can be quite one costly and also emotionally burdensome. And so it's always good to know all the different aspects and the different things at play so that your efforts can be focused in the direction that you can actually get the results that you're hoping for and not have efforts and tremendous effort in one aspect that is not necessarily going to impact the result that you're looking for. So that's tremendously important. And I also want to remind everybody, remember that the process of infertility, it does take two. So even if you have PCOS and you are experiencing infertility, you always want to make sure your partner is evaluated as well. While you are going through this process, of course, it never hurts to go through this process, right? Because your overall health will benefit, not just a matter of gaining a pregnancy and having a baby, but also your overall health will of course benefit from that. So we want to make sure that you're aware that while you're going through this, you're also having partner evaluation as well as your insulin levels checked. So tell us a little bit about, does the person who is experiencing infertility then, should they do you feel that insulin should be part of the routine evaluation, insulin levels rather should be part of the routine evaluation of an couple that is experiencing infertility?
1,000,000%. I think insulin testing should be done before they even try to conceive. And there's a couple of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a wealth of literature already published on this. So if you have high insulin levels, well, you're already, number one, you know that you're more likely to struggle with conceiving because you're more likely to struggle ovulating and implanting, whether you're doing IVF or whether you're going at it the natural way. But there was a great study that was done a few years ago. It was in Fertility and Sterility, which is a really, really prestigious journal in fertility. And it was done by this group of fertility specialists at Columbia University in New York. And they were looking at, why do so many patients miscarry or have recurrent miscarriage with, just generally, why do people have recurrent miscarriage? It wasn't specifically with PCOS. And they took these early placental cells, okay? And they exposed them to high levels of glucose or high levels of insulin. And you know what they found?
What is that?
Those little placenta cells literally did not change at all when they got them exposed to too much glucose. When they exposed them to too much insulin, verbatim, what they said in this article was that it caused more, that high insulin levels in early pregnancy are as toxic to the developing placenta as chemotherapy drugs.
Oh, wow.
Here's why that's important. Guess what's not measured
Your
in patients with
insulin.
recurrent miscarriage? They're not measuring insulin. They're just measuring glucose. If your glucose is normal, they're saying, well, your labs came back normal. We don't know. PCOS is really a metabolic problem that manifests as reproductive complications, right? And that's what's important. So, like we said, it causes the over ovulation issue. It causes the issues with actually implanting, which is step number 2. And then you have to develop this placenta, and the placenta needs to develop healthily, because that can lead to preterm delivery, miscarriage, preeclampsia, so many things can be downstream of that. And if your insulin is high, it's causing that abnormal development, which is putting you at risk of having a less healthy pregnancy. And so I always say, again, high insulin levels before you even get pregnant, because it can, managing those early can help you get pregnant, stay pregnant, and have a healthier pregnancy and a healthier baby. But that's a whole other topic about how high insulin in pregnancy leads to babies who are born more insulin resistant and lead their life.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we know that it's interesting because we do know that high glucose levels is actually a teratogen. So we know that patients like, poorly controlled diabetics, they have really high glucose levels in first trimester. We're really concerned about the baby's development because it has been well established that those glucose levels can cause um, unfortunately, fetal malformations. So I just wonder, my brain is like working like, was it the glucose was the
Because
culprit? Are we like mislabeling the
it's
culprit
the
here? Was it
insulin.
the insulin
You
levels?
know why? Because if you look at those studies that took an A1C in early pregnancy, actually A1C is not a good predictor of whether somebody's going to become gestational or preeclampsia. And we all know that, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can't just look at an A1C and see it's normal in early pregnancy, because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people with normal A1Cs, they still get gestational diabetes.
Right.
They
Yes,
still get
absolutely.
preeclampsia. And
Absolutely.
that's because what you weren't looking at was the insulin. And it was the insulin that was causing the gestational diabetes
Oh
and
my
the
goodness.
preeclampsia.
So tell us a
But
little bit about the insulin level. What if we are asking if they're asking their physicians to test? Like I don't typically test insulin level. I'm ashamed to admit I never have. But tell us the patient, if the patient has this concern. Most of our listeners are patients, identify as patients. What should they now then ask their physicians? Hey, can you please check my insulin level along with my additional testing, and what numbers should they be looking for?
yeah, I would hesitate. Oh, it would be best. I mean, best case scenario, patient comes in, I want to start trying for a baby, then they get their insulin tested. Because
Mm-hmm.
the reality is that pregnancy is a natural state of insulin resistance, right? Which is why sometimes glucose levels can get really out of control, because if they came into pregnancy already insulin resistant, then that's compounding on top of what's already a naturally insulin resistant state. And here's why. In pregnancy, you're growing and you need to store fat.
Mm-hmm.
And insulin resistance does that really well.
Mm-hmm.
So insulin resistance is natural during that first year of life. You're needing to grow and you need to store body fat. It's also normal during puberty because you're growing and you need to store body fat. It's also normal during pregnancy. So it's hard to say, okay, we're going to test their insulin throughout pregnancy, because it's going to be hard to know, right? Insulin should already normally rise. If you were able to get it preconception, that's the best, because they're not pregnant
Mm-hmm.
yet. Or if you
Mm-hmm.
can get it at that first prenatal visit, it's still early enough to where you could see elevations and know, hey, you're already starting really high before you're even.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
one of the other reasons why it's so important to look early is because there was this great study they did, and they did it in mice, actually, because it's hard. It's easier to do in mice, but they looked at PCOS insulin resistant mouse, okay, and they got
Mm-hmm.
them this mouse pregnant, and they injected androgen. They had high testosterone in this little mouse because they can cause PCOS mice. They actually, the way that they
Mm-hmm.
cause a PCOS mouse is to
Mm-hmm.
take a pregnant mouse, inject it with androgen, and inject it with insulin to make it have higher insulin levels, and that causes PCOS in the baby, because
Okay.
PCOS really starts in the womb, right?
Mm-hmm.
Overexposure to high testosterone and insulin in the womb is what leads to that. So, they found that those genetic changes lasted for at least 3 generations. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's even more reason for patients to want to get that under control before they get pregnant, because if you're insulin resistant through pregnancy, it's causing genetic changes that are going to lead that baby then to start
Mm-hmm.
life at a little bit more insulin resistant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why we see macrosomia or enlarged for gestational age and
Mm-hmm.
intrauterine fetal growth restriction. All of that is due to those babies being insulin resistant.
Okay. Okay. So when what number
Oh,
what
sorry.
is the number that they should look for when they have an insulin tested? What result, or is what result would they like? What's good?
What's good? So preconception, early pregnancy, you want it to be less than 8.
Mm-hmm.
Less than 8 microunits per milliliter. You're not going to see that probably on the lab range because they haven't had
Mm-hmm.
standardized measurements for normal ranges. But what's been
Mm-hmm.
published in literature is that it should be less than 8.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we hope that the lab test will soon
Yeah.
catch up with the literature because it's consequential. It's consequential for us as physicians, but most consequential for the patients, because when you are ordering subsequent tests or subsequent therapy or treatment, your insurance may not necessarily want to pay for that because they said, hey, this is not a justifiable cost because this value was in a normal range. And
Yes.
so these are how our industry kind of needs to catch up to what we're seeing clinically so that we can kind of move our human population in a healthy fashion forward. So thank you for doing that, and hopefully as we discuss this more, then that will create that change that we're looking for. So we want so less than 8 is what we would like to see when the insulin levels are checked. And do you suppose that we should have those insulin level checked at least once yearly?
I recommend that every year patients do a full oral glucose tolerance test with insulin, just once a year, just once a year, because
We're not gonna have friends
I know it's so
asking
hard.
patients to do a glucose tolerance test every
I
year.
know. Well, at least a fasting insulin. That's going to give you
Okay.
at least a lot of good information.
Uh-huh.
But it's really that 2 hour insulin because like for
Mhm.
me, for example,
Mhm.
I'm very insulin sensitive. My insulin is 3.2, right?
Mhm.
But when I get my 2 hour, I cause so much insulin secretion after concentrated glucose that it drives my 2 hour glucose down to the low 60s, high 50s.
Mhm.
Does that make sense? Because
Mhm.
I'm causing so much insulin that it's pushing
Yeah.
my glucose way
Yeah.
too
The
low.
rebound effect.
It's the rebound. And I see that
Uh-huh.
every time with my gestational screens when I was pregnant, I have 2 babies, that my 2 hour glucose is in the low 60s. And they're like, do you feel okay? I'm like, a little
And
nauseous.
do you think when the insulin is checked with when you have the tolerance, and just for so everyone understands, the tolerance test means that you're challenging your body to a high levels, this concentrated levels of sugar. So you're just like if you've ever been pregnant, and we know this is an infertility discussion, but if there's a concentrated form of sugar that you can drink and that just challenges your body. And then your blood is taken hourly thereafter for 2 hours. In pregnancy, it's 3 hours. And then we check to see, well, how is your body doing metabolizing this sugar? And so if the sugar levels are high, it's saying, oh, your body's having a hard time metabolizing this sugar. So you may have you may be somewhere on the diabetic spectrum, whether pre-diabetes or diabetes. So you're proposing that we add the insulin number to that. And should it stay at 8 or under as the test when your body's being challenged?
So the 2 hour insulin should be less than 50. And that's really PCOS specific because with PCOS, we are just genetically going to over secrete insulin. And for somebody who's not insulin resistant, they may be able to get their insulin back down under 8 after 2 hours.
Okay.
But with PCOS, no.
It's gonna linger.
That's too lofty a goal. It's not going to happen. So we are insulin secreting fat storage machines. So a 50 is be a great goal to get it under 50. And I know
Oh,
it's
wow.
annoying. It's
That seems
annoying
like
to
such a high
do
number.
those, huh?
That seems like such a high number, the 50.
Well, 2 hours after.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Here's an example. In our studies, our average fasting insulin was 31, which again, it should be less than 8. So it was 3 to 4 times higher. Our 2 hour insulin average was 226. So 226 micrograms, it should be less than 50. After the study, it did drop to an average of 140. So it had a
Wow.
huge drop, but still even that is 140 is still high, but it was only 8 weeks. So if they would have, if we would have continued on to watching them, it would have been great to see, 3 months, 4 months, was it down to that 50? It's just that with PCOS, we just caused this massive oversecretion.
Yeah,
And you
that's
don't know that until you test for it. And so And, going back to, that's the reason why I made these Lilly insulin kits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The worst part about getting an oral glucose tolerance test is having to wake up, get to the lab fasting, can't have your coffee, can't have any breakfast. And then you got to sit there for 2 hours. You got to take
Mm-hmm.
off work. Nobody wants to do that.
No, it's very
Right.
cumbersome.
So
Yeah,
that's why I made these kits so people can just do it home in their PJs and they don't have to take
that's
off.
awesome. Thank you for doing
Just
that.
an option for patients.
Okay, and can you get those kits on Lily Health?
Yeah, getting on Literally Health. We're about to start selling them on Amazon.
Yay.
It comes with some finger lancets. You just got a little finger stick.
Mm-hmm.
You can't even see the needle. So for needle
Mm-hmm.
folks, you
Mm-hmm.
can't even see the needle, but it comes with a little card and it has fasting glucose, 2-hour glucose. It'll tell you, or not, sorry, fasting blood, 2-hour blood.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you just wake up in your PJs. Don't drink your coffee, no water, no food, or you can drink water, no food. Prick your finger, put your blood on this little blood spot card. It comes with a
Mm-hmm.
packet of glucose. You'll pour it in water, drink it, and then set a timer for 2 hours later, poke your finger again. And then it
Mm-hmm.
comes with a prepaid mailer and it gets overnighted to the lab. So
Okay.
it's something you can do at home to really help. It's a preventative test. And it's also so important for patients going through menopause because
Mm-hmm.
with menopause, you'll see an increase in insulin just naturally. So
Mm-hmm.
it helps really keep on top of that number.
So tell us what happens to the person that has been tested and they find that their number is not in the desired range. What should they do next?
So that's when, I have tons of free education and, I'm launching an app. The education will be free. It'll be videos, infographics, written material, that to teach them what is
Mm-hmm.
insulin resistance. Okay, now you know that you have it. What should you do? And it's teaching them how certain foods affect insulin response and how, insulin is really affecting all those different signs and symptoms in pregnancy and fertility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really the recommendation. There's not a lot of medications, sadly.
Okay.
There's no FDA approved product for insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Metformin is used off label, but there's no FDA approved.
Mm-hmm.
There's some great supplements like inositol that you can take, but it's not a magic pill. You
Mm-hmm.
still have to make lifestyle choices. So
Mm-hmm.
I recommend you follow what I call a low insulin lifestyle, and it is simply a lifestyle change that prioritizes the lowering of insulin over everything else, right? It's not
Okay.
calorie, carb, fat counting. It's none of that. It is simply learning what foods spike insulin and trying to avoid those as much as possible and eating all you want of these foods that I call insulin friendly.
Okay. So tell us a little bit of some examples of what we should be avoiding and what we should eat more of.
I'll start with what we should eat more of.
Okay.
So non-starchy vegetables and fruit should be the foundation of your plan. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Things whole fruit or raw, either raw or frozen, unsweetened, not juice, raw fruit or
Mm-hmm.
non-starchy vegetables. Both of those you should eat and I know fruit, some people are like, oh, it's a lot of sugar in it. Fruit actually is pretty insulin friendly because it's part fructose, not the same thing as high fructose corn syrup.
Mm-hmm.
Naturally occurring fructose actually does not have any insulin spike to it. So fruit
Mm-hmm.
is actually a lot more insulin friendly. So non-starchy vegetables, your carrots, tomatoes, peppers, zucchini, squashes, all of those, all that should be the foundation of your plan.
Mm-hmm. The
Protein.
squashes are included.
Yeah, zucchini and yellow
Okay.
squash.
Okay.
Butternut squash is like a little bit, but actually, if you eat it in season, then it's great, right? I eat it when it's in season, which is just a few months of the year, and so I don't eat it a lot, but I'll eat it
Mm-hmm.
I like to make a butternut squash soup every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Proteins. What's your, whether it be lean animal proteins, fatty fish, eggs, if you're a vegetarian or you're plant-based, non-starchy beans. This would be edamame beans or soybeans, as well as I love lupini beans, Lupini. They're a Mediterranean bean. You can get it
Uh-huh.
on Amazon. They're no starch, just protein and fiber.
Lupini.
Lupini.
Mm-hmm.
Or nuts and seeds are also great forms of protein, healthy fats,
Mm-hmm.
fiber, and then healthy oils. So healthy oils will be avocado, coconut, or olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
So that is all the foods that are insulin friendly. And in our
Mm-hmm.
studies, we let patients don't count calories, carbs, or fat, just eat from this list of foods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Foods that spike insulin are
Okay.
starchy foods,
Okay.
Things like grains, whether it's processed or whole grains, starches means concentrated glucose, and more glucose means more insulin. So you should really try to get all of your carbohydrates from non-starchy vegetables and fruits as compared to starches. So
Mhm.
grains, beans, and potatoes are very
Mhm.
starchy, and all of those things, even things that are healthy like sweet potatoes, they have
Yeah.
great vitamin A or beta carotene and fiber, but you can get all of that in carrots with far less
Mhm.
starch. And so it's really
Mhm.
trying to think about it in that way.
Mhm.
Dairy, if you're going to eat dairy, it needs to be fermented. I talked a lot about this on our previous podcast. I welcome you to go learn more about that. And I have tons of
Mhm.
education for free on my website, all about how the fermentation process makes milk less insulin spiking.
Mhm.
Whey protein. I also talked a
Mhm.
lot about this on our previous one. Whey protein, and I'll just say whey protein is the most insulin spiking food you can eat. So if you're going to have protein powder, it should be things like egg white protein, or Greek yogurt is a great protein option. And then of course sugar. So
Mhm.
most types of dairy, starches, sugar, and whey protein. A low insulin lifestyle is all of your lean proteins, your eggs, your
Mhm.
non-starchy vegetables, fruits, healthy oils. And then in our studies, because it's a sustainable approach, we
Mhm.
recommend patients have, an ounce of really dark chocolate every day. So
Mhm.
really dark means over 75%. We even
Mhm.
let patients have a glass of red wine, but if you're trying to get pregnant, don't do that. But we let patients have a glass of red wine.
Right.
Um, and then, limited amounts of fermented dairy, which would be like Greek yogurt and small amounts of
Mhm.
cheese. So that
Okay.
is a low insulin lifestyle in a nutshell.
All right. That sounds awesome. So just want to remind everyone that to the healthy way that I would approach the low insulin lifestyle is to really kind of have a lot of veggies, right? Because having a lot of veggies, whether raw or cooked, I like raw veggies. Raw veggies fill me up more than cooked veggies, is they're filling you up. And so when you go for your lean protein, you're not eating as much of that, because you do want to be careful that you're not consuming amounts that are going to raise your cholesterol level. And so we want to kind of keep that in mind, and getting your insulin levels checked, and knowing your numbers, right? We always recommend knowing your numbers when it comes to your blood pressure, when it comes to your weight, when it comes to your BMI. Well, this is another one that we should know our numbers with, is our insulin levels. And I don't know my insulin level. I need to go check that and get that squared away so I know. And if you are struggling with infertility and trying to conceive, this is not necessarily something that you'll hear from your doctor, because quite frankly, we just have not been trained in insulin resistance. This is a growing field. This is an emerging field. And so I'm very grateful to have Dr. Chappell on, who has been gracious enough to share her knowledge, her very extensive knowledge on this subject matter. So this may be a case of the patient educating the doctor. And
You
and
can't know everything about everything, so you just do the best.
exactly. And just do it gently and just do it kindly.
Yeah.
Don't tell them you read it on Google, please.
Yes, yes.
But this is something that we all have to look at, because the fact of the matter is that these things, such as um prolonged infertility, recurrent or prolonged weight management, or overweight or obesity, there has to be something more that we are not knowledgeable of, because it's cannot just be a matter of, oh, people are just not doing what they're supposed to do. No, it's just could be that we just do not have the whole story, and now we're kind of pulling back the layers of the onion and kind of get into, hey, there's probably more to the story than we were told. So we definitely appreciate you, Dr. Chappell, and we appreciate our listeners and our viewers for tuning in to another episode of Straight Talk with My OBMD. All of this material can be found on the myobmd.org website, and also on lilyhealth.com. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Straight Talk with my OBMD.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Straight Talk with my OBMD podcast. To learn more about this topic, visit our website at myobmd.org. Subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I can't wait to spend more time with you on our next episode of Straight Talk with my OBMD.